Sarah, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Can you help me understand what GABA is?
Yeah, so GABA is a neurotransmitter, which means that it is one of just a relatively small handful of molecules in the brain that are the way neurons talk to each other. So many people have perhaps heard of dopamine or serotonin. Those are other examples of neurotransmitters, and GABA is one of those big ones. Um, And the main function of GABA is that it is inhibitory, meaning it puts the brakes on signaling in the brain to help kind of slow things down, calm it down, stop overabundant signaling, and things like that.
Okay, that actually really simplifies that. If you think about it like dopamine, like you said, a lot of people do understand what that is, and how that affects or serotonin or anything like that. So that makes a lot of sense. Now, when it comes to different variants of GABA, how does that work?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is variants in the genes or proteins for the receptor subunits of the GABA-A receptor. So I'm going to break that down. So GABA is the neurotransmitter, it's a signaling molecule, but you need something to receive those signals. And that is generally called a receptor. So you have dopamine receptors, you have serotonin receptors, you have GABA receptors, and a bunch of others. And for GABA receptors, there are two classes. There's the GABA A receptor and the GABA B receptor. And these work very differently, are made up of different types of proteins. They react to GABA differently. So what we focus on is the GABA A receptor.
And the GABA-A receptor, what does that typically engage in? Like if there's something going on with a GABA-A receptor, what does that typically look like?
Yeah, so the GABA A receptor is involved in what is called fast inhibition. It responds really quickly. And so when you have some sort of mutation or variant in one of those proteins, then it means the receptor is not able to respond to these stop signals as well. It means that it's essentially as if the brakes on your car were malfunctioning a bit. Like they're not entirely broken, but maybe you need to really press that brake all the way down before it starts to actually stop the car. Or even potentially that brake is really sensitive, where you just kind of tap it and then your car comes screeching to a halt. Either way, you don't have the right balance where you can modulate how much of a stop you're putting on the car or on all of the signals in your brain.
And typically, all of those stops or the delay to stop, that ends up being what sort of intellectual disabilities?
Yeah, it can cause all sorts of different intellectual disabilities because everything in your brain needs to be in a finely tuned balance. And if there's really any mutation at all in one of the proteins in the brain, then that tends to have consequences on the signaling. Sometimes those can be relatively minor, but because GABA is so important for signaling throughout the brain, when you have some sort of mutation or variant in one of your GABA receptor genes, then that tends to cause a lot of effects throughout the whole brain.
And a couple of them, I know from my experience, I've interviewed, I don't know if you know who she is, but Lisa O'Connor, her son had a pretty rare genetic mutation of epilepsy. So I know that GABA is involved in epilepsy. What else does it kind of, what other diagnoses or diagnoses is it associated with?
Yeah, so mutations in the GABA genes can be associated with many different types of epilepsy, because epilepsy is a very broad category. Intellectual disability and developmental delay of varying severities. People who have a variant in one of these genes might actually have no cognitive impairment at all, or it might be very severe, or anywhere in between. Autism is really common in some of our kids. Movement disorders tend to, we see that sometimes. Hypotonia, which is just refers to a lack of muscle tone, meaning that on top of the developmental delays, it makes it very hard for some of these individuals to gain motor skills. Like it might take them a really long time to sit up and then to learn to crawl and like fine motor skills, like being able to reach out and hold on to things or feed themselves can also be delayed due to that combination of the hypotonia and any like coordination issues. Yeah, so those are kind of the main symptoms that we see across the majority of our patients.
Okay. So if it has such a large, like varying degree of effect on people, do you think is it common for people to go undiagnosed with maybe something going on with their GABA receptors?
Yeah, for sure. So we know CURE GABA-A, our patient foundation knows of around 200 individuals throughout the world. And one of our researchers who's been studying GABA-A variants for a while, I believe her database is around 900 people over the past decade or so. But there are some estimates that suggest that there may be as many as 400 babies born in the US alone every year.
That's a big
So
difference.
yeah, huge difference. Yeah, so we have in our foundation of those 200 worldwide, around half are in the US, so like 100-ish, and versus 400 born just last year alone. And so many of them are going undiagnosed. Part of
And why?
it
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, part of it is just getting testing. Genetic testing is something that hasn't been as common before. So, for example, we don't have a lot of older individuals, and that's probably just because they never got tested. But as genetic testing becomes more and more common, we're hoping that we will find these patients. And doctors are also now starting to test for a wider variety of symptoms. Like it used to be that it was maybe if you had incredibly severe epilepsy, that then they would order a panel to test just the genes that were known to be involved in epilepsy. And but now it might be just having a few seizures or relatively minor delays, like sometimes even by somebody's first birthday, they can get genetic testing. You still often need to really push for it, but it's now a possibility.
Oh, that's awesome. And clearly you know a lot about this. Can you tell me a little bit about your background and what you've studied?
Yeah, so I did my PhD with Dr. Caddy Kang at Vanderbilt. And Caddy is one of the people who's just one of the founders of GABA receptor mutations and their role in epilepsy. She came from the lab of Dr. Robert McDonald, who did a lot of the founding work years before. And so Caddy has carried on. And then I did work with her for 8 years. I was working in her lab on primarily a mutation in the gamma-2 subunit of the receptor, but I also did a lot of work on a similar condition that is caused by mutations in the GABA transporter gene.
Okay. Wow. Well, that is a lot, and you're clearly an expert in this area. Going a little bit further, now you are the chief scientific officer for Cure GABA-A. What primarily is the mission for Cure GABA-A?
Yeah, Cure GABA-A is all about finding treatments for the individuals affected with these variants in their genes. So that involves patient outreach and education of patients and clinicians. And we are also always trying to find more researchers. We want to have a better understanding of the disorder And then we need that understanding in order to develop treatments.
Okay. And what are the current, biggest priorities that you guys have going on right now?
Yeah, so one of our top priorities has been our biorepository. So a biorepository is like a bank of biological samples. So we have blood, we have urine, cerebrospinal fluid, and then iPSCs, induced pluripotent stem cells, which are a really valuable tool for research. So that is hosted through Combined Brain. And so that's a shared effort across a lot of other genetic neurodevelopmental disorders. So CURE GABA-A has really been trying to build out our resources there.
Okay, awesome. Do you have any recent breakthroughs that you guys know of that you guys can talk about?
Um, so something else that we've been doing a lot of work towards is a drug repurposing trial. So what repurposing refers to is taking something that's already been approved by the FDA for like one purpose and then using it for a different condition. And so we have been working with a drug called Ravicti and repurposing that for people with GABA-A receptor variants. That's through a collaboration with Dr. Zach Greenspan at Cornell. So that has been really exciting to do that. We've had, I think, around 10 patients who have enrolled so far.
And do you know the progress of those patients right now?
I don't know offhand how they're doing. Some of them are fairly newly enrolled, and so it'll take several weeks or months to know for sure how they're doing. But anecdotally, there have been some patients, or their families rather, who are reporting success that the number of seizures has gone down dramatically.
Wow. And GABA A can specifically lead to the diagnosis of autism and epilepsy. Can you explain a little bit of what would cause the difference?
Yeah, so in a lot of our patients, they might have both. Um, And as to why somebody might have just autism or just epilepsy or a combo is actually not really well understood for GABA A or for a lot of the other genetic neurodevelopmental disorders that are out there, because oftentimes it'll seem like two mutations are causing similar effects in like dishes in cell dishes in a lab, but then the patients might have completely different phenotypes or clinical symptoms. So we don't really understand yet. And this is one of the areas that's difficult to research in rare disease because to understand this, you need to have a large data set. You need to be able to look at many different patients who have all sorts of different mutations and then find out the commonalities between them, be able to like cluster them into different groups. And in rare disease, when again, we only are in contact with 200 people across the entire world, it's difficult to make those connections and find out what it is that predisposes somebody to have seizures or to the autism. And so this is another thing that Cure GABA-A is really pushing is to have our families enroll in natural history studies so that we can get this better understanding of what the group as a whole looks like.
So a big piece of the goal of Cure GABA-A in general is getting kind of that awareness out for people to get the testing and get that genetic testing and to understand this entire process a little bit more and get more data on it.
Yeah, so the genetic testing isn't something that Cure GABA-A is pushing for so much. That tends to be after somebody has already gotten their genetic testing, and then they find out that they have a variant in one of the GABA-A genes, then they will find us. Combined Brain has a project called Project Find Out that is trying to support more genetic testing of newborns to help them get those diagnoses sooner.
So it slows development in children, right? In all the different ways that you said. And does that lead to eventually it will go away and I guess the delaying will speed up again, or does that go on forever?
So it depends, and also we don't fully understand yet. So yeah, for some individuals, they might catch up. Sometimes within a few years. Other times it might take like many years of intensive therapies in order to catch up, but they might get there eventually. And then for some individuals, based on our current treatments and therapies that are available, it seems that they will have intellectual disability for all their entire life. But we don't really know the trajectory of, like, if we just find a new patient, we don't know what life is going to look like for them. Everyone's different and unique, and so it can be terrifying for parents to not know what the outcome is going to be. But also that gives you hope that it's not set in stone. We don't know what's going to happen, and so just keep working with the best of what you've got.
And the therapies that you're doing, does that activate these GABA receptors? Is that how that works?
By therapies, I'm referring to physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, all of those things. So it's not focused on the GABA-A receptors. This is just trying to help somebody gather skills. The way that they would undergo these therapies is going to look pretty similar across any genetic neurodevelopmental disorder.
Okay. And I was just trying to figure out how does that, so if you have a uh, variance that is causing something to just misfire, I guess, in one of the receptors. I may not be saying that correctly, but how do the therapies, even if it is just some sort of speech therapy, does that change the makeup of the receptor, or how does that eventually over time, I understand kind of the training involved in it, but
Mhm.
does that change anything physically?
Not really, other than on the cellular level, when anybody is learning a new skill, you do get some physical changes in the connections of your neurons, but that's about it. So here it's just anybody that has one of these variants, they're still capable of learning. It's just slower. It's gonna take a lot more work. And so that's what they're doing these therapies for. It's not trying to specifically fix the molecular problem. It's just giving them that exposure to build the skills. If
Gotcha.
we want to try to change things physically about the receptor, then that's where things like gene therapy and other sorts of like medical treatments might come in.
Can you go into a little bit of what gene therapy is?
Yes, so gene therapy, the way most people think of it, is replacing the gene that has the mutation in it. And so you would put in a good copy or even try to repair the mutation that is already existing. But there are some other ways of trying to correct the mutation. One thing is antisense oligonucleotides, or ASOs. These are really promising because they can still target the mutation without being a permanent, like one and done treatment where if it doesn't work as perfectly as hoped for, like you can't necessarily redo it. ASOs are something where you can try again, or if there are side effects and this doesn't seem to be working out for you, then you can stop an ASO. So it tends to be safer.
Okay. And I read also that you guys are doing some research on gene editing technologies. Is that similar? Is that the same thing?
So for the gene editing, I actually am not too certain on
That's
the
okay.
details of this because it's through, I believe it's Henry Lee at Boston Children's Hospital. He is doing some work for other genetic epilepsies, and he will be working on GABA-A disorders. I don't know if he's started yet, and I don't know the details of what he's going to be doing. But I think another thing that's really interesting that we also are working towards is mRNA lipid nanoparticles. And so this is a way of delivering the instructions to create the proteins. And a lot of people still tend to think of it as being in the category of gene therapy. It's adjacent. It's not quite the same as gene therapy, and it's definitely not gene editing, but it is another area that we are pursuing. And we're mostly just waiting on the fundraising in order to be able to take things to the next step.
Okay. I've noticed that CURE GABA-A focuses heavily on children. Does that mean that most adults you would not be able to notice if they had some variants or anything like that? Or does it go away over time?
So we do focus mostly on children, but that's because that's who's been diagnosed so far. There are a couple of older individuals who are part of our group, but it's just as I had mentioned earlier, where genetic testing isn't nearly as common in adults. So it's if you take the same individual and they were born today, then there might be a very high probability that they would get genetic testing. But if somebody is 25 years old and they've had all those years of figuring out what works for them, they tend to be in kind of just a steady state. And so there isn't a like pressing clinical need to do genetic testing. I still think that it's valuable, and that does seem to be an area of advocacy that is picking up steam to start testing adults with severe epilepsy or intellectual disability, in part because as treatments do start to be on the horizon, then we want to be aware of what patients are out there in order to be able to get them treatment. But yeah, so a lot of the adults that you're still going to know that they have some sort of variant, or at least the ones that we are in contact with. It's just, there just aren't a whole lot of them.
Gotcha. What current trials outside of Ravicti is CURE GABA-A supporting right now?
So that's the only clinical trial, but we do have research studies that we are supporting. So one of those is with Dr. Sebastian Ortiz, who is trying to understand what medications help our community. And Dr. Reiki Mueller is also doing a natural history study. Plus, there's the one that we are conducting through the foundation itself, where parents can take standardized surveys on our platform called Matrix, and then we can make that data available to researchers or even to pharmaceutical groups who might want to better understand the disorder before they start pursuing the research to create a compound.
Wow. Are you guys open to allowing more people into the Ravicti trial right now if somebody wanted to inquire about it?
The formal clinical trial, no, that one only had a very few number of spots, in part because the manufacturer of the drug was supplying a given number of doses for people, but people are still able to get Ravicti, and then we highly encourage them to collect the same uh, data sets as that clinical trial so that we can kind of pool the data. There have been, for example, some families in Spain and there's one in Canada who have been seeking out Ravicti, even though they're not part of the formal clinical trial. Their doctors are still trying to get them the drug, and then we'll be able to understand from a larger group of people than just the very few spots in the clinical trial.
So the name of the association is CURE GABA-A, right? Do we know what a cure would look like for this?
Yeah, so a cure is probably going to be different for the different subunits and for even individuals with different types of mutations. So, uh, based on the type of variant or of gene that is affected, then some of those are expressed very early in life, and then the gene it doesn't turn off entirely, but it might not be turned on to nearly the same level later in life. And so that is different to try to target that versus something where the gene is expressed throughout your entire life. And then another thing that can complicate it is whether the variant is causing a gain of function or a loss of function. And so there depends basically whether you want to boost the activity of the receptor or perhaps bring it down.
Okay. And do you have any guesstimate that you could put to when you guys think that you would potentially find a cure or anything like that? Is that even on the horizon right now?
So treatments for sure are on the horizon, and the difference is, a cure will like hopefully fix everything permanently, while a treatment is just kind of addressing symptoms or fixing part of the underlying issues, but your mutation is still there. So for one of the things that we have on the horizon is the mRNA lipid nanoparticles project. And so for that, it's some of the in vitro work in cells, most of that's already been done. We're just waiting on experiments in mice before we can bring this to the FDA for the next steps. So once we raise the funding for that, which is going to be around $100,000 to test one one type of treatment in one mouse line, then we would be able to start bringing that to the next step. But because there are these different subunits, then we might need to repeat that process across a couple different genes.
So would you say that money is the thing that is probably the biggest barrier right now to furthering the research and finding a cure?
Yes, definitely.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
money because there's yeah, that project with the mRNA lipid nanoparticles. We're also hoping to fund a postdoc in Dr. Henry Lee's lab who would be able to do research specifically towards finding treatments for GABA-A disorders. But until we have the funding for that, then we aren't able to fill that position right now. Um, Trying to think what else we actively need funding for. Our natural history platform costs around $10,000 every year. And so, in the grand schemes of medical funding, like that doesn't sound like a lot, but when a lot of this money comes from like bake sales and walkathons and things of that nature, then that $10,000 every year just for understanding the disorder definitely adds up.
Yeah, I could imagine. So if somebody wanted to help right now, they've listened to this entire conversation and they want to help, how can they help?
They can promote the disorder and the organization, definitely bringing attention. They can go to our website, curegabaa.org, and there's information there on donating. Um, and Yeah, I mean, the donations and spreading awareness. It's a rare disease, and so many people have never heard of GABA-A receptor mutations in their life. Many doctors haven't even seen a patient with this particular disorder before. And so spreading awareness to help create that ripple effect and hopefully gain additional fundraising possibilities is huge.
Well, hopefully we can be a big part of that.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Sarah, thank you for joining me today. I appreciate your time.
Right. Yeah, of course. Thanks.
Thank you.